Okay, good morning. I'll make a start. So thank you very much again for joining us for our tax year end webinar. My name is Lindsey Martin. I'm one of the advisors within the practice. Hopefully a few of you will recognise me. I've been here for about 5 years and work closely with my other advisor colleagues. So if you don't recognise me, hopefully you'll recognise one of them. They are all on the call, so all listening in. So if you've got any questions at all, obviously reach out to them at the end, but feel free to also answer any questions. Today, there is a Q&A button if you wiggle your mouse at the bottom of the screen. So feel free to type your questions in there and I'll do my best to pick that up at the end. If your question is a bit more case specific, then I'll pass it on to your relevant advisor and get them to get in touch with you. So I won't keep you for too long. It probably lasts about 20 minutes, half an hour, but the key purpose of today is running over all of the tax kind of updates, changes, making sure that you're making use of your allowances. So tax changes then. The autumn budget last year had a number of changes to our allowances that I'll cover off briefly in a second. Being aware of these changes is really important to long-term planning. So we've also got the spring budget coming up on the 6th of March. We don't know what that's going to bring. The purpose of today is not to predict what that's going to look like, but again, really just to cover off what we do know now and making sure that we're making use of our allowances. So the budget the autumn budget last year, so a couple of changes that were brought in was the national insurance contributions were reduced from 12% to 10%, and that took effect of January this year. So hopefully some of you have realised that in your income, the small changes of that. From the 6th of April this year, no one will be required to pay Class 2 self-employed national insurance contributions. And also from that date, the main rate of Class 4 self-employed national insurance contributions is also reduced from 9% to 8%. So although quite minimal, obviously, it's positive and claws back a little bit of income. So income tax. So there aren't any major changes. Personal allowance remains the same at 12,570. Remember, if you earn over £100,000, then you do start to lose that personal allowance. So this is adjusted at for every £2 that you earn over that 100,000, you will lose £1 of the personal allowance. So effectively gives you a taxation rate of 60% on earnings. But there are ways that we can help minimise this, and I'll share an example shortly. Another thing that's frozen is the starting rate savings band at £5,000. This is tapered off and lost at £1 for every £1 over earnings over the personal allowance. Personal savings allowance is also frozen at £1,000 for basic rate taxpayers and £500 for higher rate taxpayers. Now, at the minute, obviously, savings rates are quite favourable. So some of you might be finding that you're paying income tax on savings that you weren't paying before. So it might be worth looking if there are other ways to be able to, invest your money, save your money to try and mitigate this. And then rates of income haven't changed either. So for a basic rate payer, it's 20%. For a higher rate payer, it's 40%. And for an additional rate payer, it is 45%. So they've remained this way for a while. Obviously, with inflation, naturally, our income does increase. So some of you, again, might be finding that you're tipping into higher rates than you've been used to paying before. So again, just important to have conversations and just see that you're making the best of what's available, and might be that we make small changes to your planning. Okay, so income tax planning then. So there are ways that we can plan to make use of allowances to try and mitigate some inheritance tax. So saving rates, as I say, currently high, so more paying tax on the income. So really making sure that we're fully utilising our ISA as a first port of call. So you've got 20,000 that you can put in an ISA per tax year that you will not pay income tax on. Also, you've got your starting rate band and your dividend allowance as well that you can be using to help mitigate some of that tax on income, on savings. Couples have also got scope to use allowances between them. So in a scenario where you've got a married couple or a couple in a civil partnership, where one is a non-taxpayer and the other is a basic rate taxpayer, you can transfer some of the non-taxpayer's personal allowance to the basic rate taxpayer, therefore saving, an amount of income tax. So again, all really useful planning. So really just encouraging investing in tax efficient solutions, investments, sorry. So some of which provide tax relief, but they do come with their own caveats and some are considered high risk. So again, just really important just to talk to us so that we can lay that out in more detail and discuss whether that is relevant to you. And then reduction in personal allowance. So again, I've touched on that and I will share an example shortly where we can, help mitigate that personal allowance being lost. So moving on then to dividend tax allowance. So this has been halved and will be halved again. So at present, it's at £1,000 for this tax year up until the 5th of April. And then from the 6th of April, it is going to be halved to £500 per individual. The rates of tax remain the same. So for basic rate, that is 8.25%. Higher rate is 33.75%, and then additional rate is 39.35%. So one consideration we would suggest, again, just an example, is a business owner that's typically taking dividend income to try and draw some funds out of the business. If that fund isn't needed, then rather than paying a dividend, it might be better planning to contribute to a pension. So, for example, a higher rate taxpayer pays £20,000 dividend payment. After corporation tax and dividend tax is taken, the payment is worth £10,732. Now, making a pension contribution of £20,000 means that the contribution is free of corporation tax and can grow tax efficiently until drawing the income in retirement. So similarly to capital gains tax, so this is due to be lowered again. It has been lowered previously and currently stands at £6,000 per individual. And then from the 6th of April is due to be halved to £3,000 per individual. So really just encouraging to make use of that before that goes and is halved, because in a lot of cases, it is a case of use it or lose it. We can't sort of carry it over. So the rates, again, they remain the same. So for basic rate, it is 10%, and for higher rate taxpayers, it's 20%. But for where a property is involved that isn't your own residence, the rate is increased to 18% for basic rate taxpayers and 25% for higher rate. So a couple of things to think about then is spreading your investments across other wrappers that are taxed differently. So for example, you've got ISAs, unit trusts, bonds, shares, all taxed differently using different allowances. So just making sure that you've got a good spread. With capital gains tax, you can carry forward losses from previous years. So you can mitigate kind of, if you make a gain in a future year, you can offset that loss from a previous year. So that's good to know. Within St James's Place, we've got something that's called a unit trust ISA feeder. So essentially, you invest in the unit trust and it feeds the ISA each tax year. So making use of your £20,000 allowance each tax year, but also making use of the capital gains tax allowance. So the unit trust does attract capital gains. So really just utilising that allowance each year and feeding it into the ISA. Again, that's something that we can help you with and make sure that that's used. So an example that I wanted to share, as previously suggested, is an individual that has got income over £100,000. So in this example, this individual has a salary of £104,000. So with no planning, this is kind of the tax implication of that. So the personal allowance has been reduced to £10,570. So as discussed before, for every £2 over the 100,000, you lose £1 of your personal allowance. So in this scenario, they have lost £2,000 of the personal allowance, taking it to 10,570, meaning that 93,430 of their income is subject to income tax. So the basic rate band of 37,700 taxed at 20% is 7,540, and then the rest is subject to income tax of 40%, giving a total tax bill of 29,832. So simply by making a gross pension contribution of £4,000, so bringing that salary back to 100,000, means that the personal allowance is clawed back. So solution then. Salary is still 104, but the personal allowance is now 12,570, meaning that taxable income is 91,430. Now, because we've made that £4,000 pension contribution, it means that the basic rate band is extended by £4,000. So more of it is taxed at 20%. So 41,700 at 20% is 8,340. And then the rest taxed at 40%, giving you a total tax bill of 28,232. So the difference from the previous slide gives you a difference in tax bill of 1,600. Now, going back then to the £4,000 contribution into the pension, that will benefit from tax relief at source of 20%. So there will be an additional £800 on that pension contribution that we can add back into that £1,600 saving, giving you £2,400, which is an effective rate of 60% on that £4,000 contribution. So kind of that's what we mean when we talk about the 60% tax trap. But as I say, it's just a really kind of simple planning tool that we can use to, one, claw back that personal allowance, but two, obtain some tax relief on the contribution. So moving on then to inheritance tax, well, I'll briefly touch on this, but for the minute it is frozen until 2028. There aren't any changes. I'm aware that there obviously are media speculations with the upcoming election that the inheritance tax may be scrapped. Again, we can only work on what we know. So as it stands, we've each got an inheritance tax allowance of £325,000 per person, with an additional £175,000 per person if you're giving away a residential property to a direct descendant. So essentially £500,000 per person, if in this scenario, and £1 million for a married couple or a couple in a civil partnership. Anything in your estate above this £1 million or £500,000 will be taxed at 40%. So, you know, it's essential that we start planning to make sure that you don't fall into that trap. And also to mention that for estates worth more than £2 million, you do start to lose that residential nil rate band at a rate of £1 for every £2 that you're over 2 million. So again, if you fall into that category, please talk to us because there are ways that we can help with this. I will touch on a couple of tools that we can help. And one thing that we always encourage is gifting. So we've all got an annual gifting allowance, which is £3,000 that we're able to give each year. And you can also give as many £250 gifts as you like. There is also excess income gifts. So for example, if an individual has earnings of £2,000 a month, but they're only spending £1,000 a month, i.e., you know, essential and discretionary expenditure is £1,000, that's leaving them with £1,000 each month that's building up, obviously making that inheritance tax problem worse. So you can give that £1,000 away completely inheritance tax free. So that's really useful to know. You can also make gifts, outright gifts in your lifetime. You can give away whatever you like. On survival of 7 years, typically it will fall out of your estate. So we can discuss the consequences of this and find the best way of doing so. More than happy to have a discussion conversation. You can also invest in inheritance tax savings vehicles, which provide different outcomes. So in a scenario where you don't feel comfortable gifting it away, you want to remain in control, or you want to remain, give you access to the assets, then there are ways and means that we can do this through trusts and investments. So again, talk to us and then we can go through the options and make sure that it's right for you. Finally, we always talk about, one, having a will, but two, also making sure that it's drafted tax efficiently as well. So I just really wanted to share an example because the £3,000 a year doesn't sound like a lot to be able to gift away, but just the impact that it can have if you start planning early. So in this example, Dorothy's 86, and for the past 35 years, she's been giving the £3,000 a year to her son, Pete. So the total gift after 35 years is 105,000. Now, in this example, I am assuming that Dorothy has an inheritance tax problem. So, had she have kept that in her estate, then it would be subject to inheritance tax. But furthermore, if Pete invested that 3,000 each year, assuming a 5% growth after 35 years, that investment pot would equate to 284,509. So 40% of that is an inheritance tax savings of 113,804. So although the 3,000 doesn't sound like a lot, as I say, planning in advance and making sure that we're using these tools is really effective. So this is quite a busy slide and really just details an overview of the allowances that we have. We will send these out so you've got them to hand, but just kind of covering off what is there. So you've got your ISA allowance as mentioned. So we'll be discussing these quite a lot between now and the end of the tax year. Very popular, introduced in 1999, 4 main types. So you've got your cash ISA, your stocks and shares, innovative finance ISA, and a LISA. Lots of people have cash ISAs and rates are very favourable at the minute. So, it's a good place to sort of have your emergency fund. If it is more of a kind of long-term investment, then I would encourage a discussion around the merits of perhaps the stocks and shares ISA. Obviously, with savings rates, they're kind of up and down, as are investments, but kind of longer term, it might be beneficial to have a discussion. You've also got your junior ISA, so an allowance of £9,000 per junior individual. So discussed, inheritance tax and being able to gift. So this might be a good home for if you're giving away that £3,000 each year for the next generation, whether that be for funding a car or university fees, things like that. So again, it's good use of allowances. Capital gains, I've touched on. Personal savings allowance, again, I've sort of mentioned, a lot of us are probably falling into income tax on savings. So again, making sure that you're using that ISA allowance as a first port of call. Pension allowance, that has increased to £60,000 over the last couple of years. And so essentially you can contribute up to £60,000 or equivalent of net relevant UK relevant earnings, whichever is the lower. So again, making sure that making use of the annual pension allowance, because also you get tax relief on entry as well. Gifting I've touched on, and dividend allowance too. So as I say, we'll send these out to you at the end so that you've got them to hand. So as I say, the budget is due on the 6th of March. Obviously, we'll update you once we know more on what impact that can have in the next tax year. But really just making sure that we've got a tax efficient strategy, being aware of reliefs, extensions and allowances and using them effectively. Because as mentioned before, a lot of these are use it or lose it. So it's not a case of you can carry it over. So kind of making sure that we're using them in this tax year. So the purpose of this webinar really has been to give you a good overview of the tax considerations for the 23-24 tax year. Obviously, all our circumstances are unique, so there's no one size fits all. So, yeah, really just having a conversation with us. We have got a tool that we use called a tax health check. So asking a few questions and determining, you know, your situation and ways that we can make improvements. So if you're interested in that, please reach out and we're more than happy to have a conversation and book a meeting in. So actions then, I've put a few actions on there in terms of efficiently using your ISA and your pension contributions, making sure that, you know, we're using all of the tax exemptions that are available to us. Some of it might be relevant to you, some of it might not be relevant, some of it might be relevant to your friends or your family. So if anything has kind of popped up and you think, you know, my daughter might benefit from that, please point her in our direction, because that's what we're here for and that's what we love to do. So yeah, I'm more than happy to help anyone that needs it. So that kind of wraps up today. So thank you very much for joining. There are a couple of questions that have come in. So one of them is, what counts as relevant income for pension contributions? So that's the £60,000 that I mentioned before. So relevant income is relevant UK earnings. So unfortunately, we can't use things like rental income or investment income. So if that is something that you want to sort of run by us, then yeah, please just kind of drop us an email or pick up the phone. We can book in a discussion. But essentially it is sort of UK relevant earnings. And another one, do I pay inheritance tax if I leave everything to my spouse? So again, that's kind of the transfer between spouses, as I mentioned before, using allowances. So if you pass away, then your estate is essentially passed over to your spouse, and so is your allowances. So that kind of comes in with, you know, having that 500,000 nil rate band and residential nil rate band, which equates to 1 million for a married couple or a couple in a civil partnership. So yes, you can pass it over to your spouse. You won't pay inheritance tax on the first death, but then we'd encourage sort of planning from there to make sure that, you know, everything's in an order and there isn't any sort of anything else we should be doing. I think that covers most things. There is a couple that I'll get the advisors to pick up separately. But really just thank you for your time. We have got some webinars coming up. Look out for the invites on your emails. So we've got inheritance tax planning on the 26th of April. Obviously, I've covered off a little bit with that, but that'll be in a bit more detail. And then a new one for us in June is holding difficult conversations with your parents. So again, look out for details of those and hopefully we will see you then. But thank you very much for your time today. Lovely to see you all, and have a good day and reach out if you need anything. Thank you very much.